Do cheating husbands, lies, and shocking betrayals fascinate you? Then this is your channel. Drop a like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. I should have known the moment I stopped recognizing the smell of my own home. It happened on a Tuesday, one of those ordinary evenings that later you realize weren't ordinary at all. I came home earlier than usual, groceries in hand, keys barely out of the lock, and something stopped me in the hallway. Not a sound, not a voice. Just a scent hanging in the air like an uninvited guest who hadn't bothered to leave. Jasmine and vanilla, my sister Rachel's perfume. I told myself it was nothing. She had stopped by that afternoon, I remembered. She'd texted me around 2, just dropping off that book I promised you. And I'd replied with a heart emoji without looking up from my desk. Normal, completely normal. Rachel was always coming and going. She had a key because I trusted her, because she was my sister, because some doors you never think to close. I put the groceries away. I made dinner. I set 2 plates on the table and waited for my husband, Daniel, the way I had waited for him 1,000 times before. He came home at 7:15, kissed my cheek, said the drive was brutal, and sat down across from me like every other night of our 9 years together. But his collar was different. I didn't say anything. I noticed it the way you notice a crack in a wall you've walked past 100 times, suddenly visible, impossible to unsee. His collar was slightly turned, the way it gets when someone pulls at it. Daniel never touched his collar. He was meticulous about his appearance, almost obsessively so. Pressed shirts, straight collars, always. "How was your day?" I asked. "Exhausting," he said. "Meetings back to back." He reached for the bread. His hands were steady. His voice was calm. And that calm, that particular, practiced calm, was the first thing that felt genuinely wrong. I watched him eat. I counted the things I knew about this man. The way he chewed slowly on the left side, the habit of checking his phone face down between bites, the small sigh he made before saying something he didn't want to say. I had memorized him the way you memorize a home, without realizing it, until something is moved. Something had been moved. I didn't know what yet. I didn't have a name for the feeling sitting heavy in my chest between the rice and the silence, but I knew this. The woman who had walked into this kitchen 20 minutes ago was not the same woman now sitting at this table. She was already counting, already watching, already beginning to understand that some Tuesday evenings don't end. They simply become the before. The book was on the coffee table. I noticed it the next morning. A paperback with a broken spine, the kind that's been read more than once. Rachel had supposedly left it for me. That was her reason for coming by. I picked it up, turned it over, read the back cover. A novel about a woman rebuilding her life after loss. Rachel's handwriting was inside the front cover. "Thought of you. Love, R." I set it back down and never touched it again. Not because of the book, because of what I found beneath it. A hair tie. Dark red. The thin kind Rachel always wore around her wrist like a bracelet. I had seen it there 100 times. On her wrist at Christmas dinner, at our mother's birthday, at the small gatherings where she and Daniel would sit at opposite ends of the table and make polite, forgettable conversation. Or so I had believed. I held the hair tie between 2 fingers for a long moment, then placed it on the kitchen counter where Daniel would see it. I said nothing. I made coffee, got dressed, and went to work. I am not a woman who screams before she has evidence. I am the kind of woman who watches, who waits, who needs to be completely certain before she burns anything down. That evening, Daniel walked past the counter 3 times before I saw it. The pause. Half a second, maybe less, his eyes landing on that small, dark red circle, and then lifting immediately, deliberately, to somewhere else. The refrigerator, the window, my face. "Good day?" he asked. "Productive," I said. We were fluent in this language, the language of 2 people saying everything except what needed to be said. 9 years builds that kind of vocabulary. You learn the silences as well as the words. You learn which questions not to ask because you already know the answer would require you to do something you're not ready to do. I wasn't ready yet, but I was getting there. That night, I lay beside him in the dark and listened to his breathing slow into sleep, and I thought about Rachel, my younger sister, the one who called me every Sunday morning without fail, the one who held my hand at our father's funeral and didn't say a word because she knew words were useless, the one who knew every version of me, the insecure 20-year-old, the exhausted newlywed, the woman who cried in parking lots when life became too much. She knew where I was soft. She knew exactly where to press. I stared at the ceiling and understood, with the quiet devastation of someone watching a glass fall in slow motion, that the worst betrayals never arrive loudly. They leave a hair tie on your coffee table and wait for you to find it. Rachel called every Sunday at 9, without fail, without exception. Rain, argument, bad signal, it didn't matter. 9 o'clock. My phone would light up with her name, and we would talk for 40 minutes about nothing important and everything real. It was the most consistent thing in my life. More consistent than my marriage, I realized later. More consistent than Daniel's good moods or his promises, or the way he used to look at me before looking became an effort. The Sunday after I found the hair tie, she didn't call. I sat with my coffee and watched 9 o'clock arrive and pass. 9:15, 9:30. I told myself she was busy. I told myself she had overslept, that her phone had died, that there was a perfectly reasonable explanation sitting just outside my reach. I am good at building those explanations. I had been building them for months without knowing that's what I was doing. At 10, I called her. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. Her voice on the recording, bright, familiar, slightly rushed, said she'd call back soon. I hung up without leaving a message. What would I have said? I found your hair tie. Your perfume is in my hallway. My husband's collar was turned, and his eyes went somewhere wrong when he saw the evidence of you on my kitchen counter. Nothing I could say out loud yet, not without sounding like a woman coming apart at the seams. Instead, I watched Daniel that morning with the careful attention of someone who has finally decided to pay attention. He was relaxed in a way that unsettled me, the particular relaxation of someone who believes they are safe. He made pancakes, which he hadn't done in months. He hummed something low and tuneless while he cooked. He refilled my coffee without being asked. Kindness is cover. I know that now. At noon, Rachel texted, "Sorry, crazy morning. Talk soon." 4 words and a heart. After 9 years of 40-minute Sunday calls, I read it 3 times, looking for something beneath the surface. A crack, a hesitation, anything that confirmed what my body already knew, even if my mind was still negotiating. The heart emoji did it. Rachel never used heart emojis with me. We were not that kind of sisters. We were the kind who said love you by showing up, by remembering, by staying on the phone 10 minutes longer than necessary. A heart emoji was something you sent to an acquaintance, something distant, something that kept you at arm's length while appearing warm. She was already creating distance, which meant there was something to be distant from. I put my phone face down on the table, the same way Daniel put his, and for the first time I understood exactly what that gesture meant. It meant don't look closer. It meant I have something to hide. Lies have a structure. I know that now in a way I didn't before, not intellectually, but in my bones, in the particular ache that settles behind your sternum when you start seeing the framework of something that was built specifically to deceive you. A lie between 2 people who know you well is not a single thing. It's a construction. It has load-bearing walls and carefully placed windows and doors that open only in the right light. I started mapping it in week 3. Daniel had begun coming home later on Tuesdays and Thursdays, not dramatically late, 20 minutes, sometimes 30, always with an explanation already assembled before I could ask. Traffic on the bridge, a call that ran long, a colleague who needed something at the last minute. Small, reasonable, unverifiable. The kind of excuses that don't invite questions because they're just boring enough to be true. But I had stopped believing in coincidences. I started noticing the pattern the way you notice a stain on a white wall. Once seen, impossible to ignore. Tuesday and Thursday were the days Rachel taught her afternoon yoga class across town. I knew her schedule the way sisters know these things, passively, peripherally, the accumulated knowledge of years of casual conversation. Her studio was 12 minutes from our apartment. 12 minutes from Daniel's office. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Confrontation without complete certainty hands the other person a window to climb through, a chance to reframe, to explain, to make you feel unreasonable for suspecting. I had watched enough of my own marriage to know that Daniel was skilled at reframing. He could take a fact and rotate it until it looked like something else entirely. It was, I had once admired, one of his most impressive qualities. Now it terrified me. So instead, I did something small and precise. I noted the mileage on his car on a Tuesday morning before he left, just a number written in the Notes app on my phone, between a grocery list and a dentist appointment. Ordinary. Invisible. When he came home that evening, I checked it again while he showered. 17 miles more than his office route accounted for. I stood in the parking garage holding my phone and felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not tears, but a cold and clarifying calm. The kind that comes when the thing you feared most finally steps out of the shadows and shows you its face. There is a strange relief in certainty, even when certainty is devastating. The not knowing had been its own kind of violence. Now I knew the shape of it. I went back upstairs. I heated dinner. I poured 2 glasses of water and set them on the table with steady hands. Daniel walked in smelling of soap and smiled at me like a man with nothing to hide. I smiled back like a woman who had just started building a case. I am not a woman who goes through her husband's phone. I had always believed that, held it as a point of quiet pride, the kind of pride that feels like trust but is sometimes just fear dressed in dignified clothing. I believed that love required a certain willful blindness, that checking, searching, verifying was a violation of something sacred between 2 people who had chosen each other. I believed that until a Thursday evening when Daniel left his phone on the bathroom counter and walked downstairs to answer the door. It lit up. 1 notification. A name I knew better than almost any other name in my life. No message preview. He had disabled those, I noticed. At some point I couldn't precisely identify. Just the name, glowing white against the dark screen, announcing itself with the casual confidence of something that believed it was safe. Rachel. I stood in the bathroom doorway for 3 seconds. Counted them. Then I picked up the phone. It was locked, naturally. But I knew Daniel's passcode the way long-married people know these things. Not because I'd memorized it deliberately, but because I had watched him enter it 1,000 times across 1,000 ordinary moments. 4 digits. Our anniversary month and year. Reversed. A romantic gesture when he'd said it years ago. Now it felt like an irony so sharp it could draw blood. The message thread loaded. I read quickly, methodically, the way I read contracts at work, looking for the language beneath the language, the implications hiding inside ordinary words. There were no explicit declarations, nothing that a defense attorney couldn't explain away. But there was a texture to their conversation that turned my stomach slowly, deliberately, the way you turn a key in a lock. Inside jokes I wasn't part of, references to things I hadn't known they'd done together. A message from Rachel 3 weeks ago. She doesn't notice anything. Daniel's response 2 minutes later. I know. She doesn't notice anything. I set the phone back exactly as I had found it. Screen down, slightly angled toward the sink. I looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Really looked. The way you avoid doing when you're afraid of what you'll find. My face was composed. My hands were still. Whatever was happening inside my chest was happening quietly, contained, waiting for a moment I hadn't yet chosen. Daniel came back upstairs, picked up his phone without glancing at me, slipped it into his pocket. Who was at the door? I asked. Package delivery, he said. I nodded and walked past him toward the bedroom. She doesn't notice anything. They had built their entire architecture on that assumption, on the woman they thought they knew, the one who looked away, who gave the benefit of the doubt, who loved so completely she had stopped seeing clearly. That woman was gone now, and they had no idea. I invited Rachel to dinner. It was a Thursday, deliberately chosen, precisely timed. I called her on a Wednesday afternoon with the warm, unhurried voice of a woman who suspects nothing. And I said, I miss you. Come over tomorrow. I'll make that pasta you love. There was a pause on her end, half a breath too long. Then, of course I'd love that. She almost said no. I could feel it in that pause, the rapid internal calculation of someone managing 2 separate realities simultaneously. But saying no would have raised questions she wasn't prepared to answer. So she said yes, the way guilty people say yes to things that terrify them, because refusal costs more than endurance. I spent Thursday preparing with unusual care, not the pasta. I made something more demanding, a recipe that required attention, that kept Daniel in the kitchen with me, that made the 3 of us occupy a small space together for an extended period of time. Proximity reveals things that distance protects. I had learned that recently. Rachel arrived at 7 with wine, and the particular brightness of someone performing normalcy. She was dressed carefully, not overdressed, not underdressed, but calibrated. Her hair was down. The dark red hair ties were on her wrist, 3 of them, stacked. She kissed my cheek and hugged me with both arms and smelled exactly like my hallway. Jasmine and vanilla. Daniel greeted her from the kitchen doorway with the measured friendliness of a man who has rehearsed. Not cold enough to be suspicious, not warm enough to betray anything. A perfectly modulated performance. I watched them not look at each other the way you watch two people pretending not to know a secret, the careful avoidance that is itself a kind of contact. We sat down to eat. The conversation was ordinary on the surface and completely extraordinary underneath. I asked Rachel about her yoga classes. She asked me about work. Daniel refilled glasses and made the appropriate sounds of a comfortable evening between family. But I was watching the geometry of it. Who spoke to whom, who laughed a beat too late, who reached for the bread to fill a silence that had become too specific. Twice Rachel looked at Daniel when she thought I wasn't watching. Not with longing, not with guilt, with something more complicated. A question she was asking him without words, and he was answering without words, and the entire exchange lasted less than 2 seconds each time. Are we safe? Yes. She doesn't notice anything. After dinner, Rachel helped me clear the table. We stood side by side at the sink the way we had stood 1,000 times before, and she told me about a man she was supposedly seeing, a detail so specific and elaborated that it felt immediately like something constructed rather than lived. I listened carefully. I filed everything away. And when she left that night, hugging me at the door with her Jasmine perfume and her careful eyes, I held on 1 second longer than usual, long enough to feel her hesitate. I wasn't supposed to be there. That is the detail that stays with me even now. The specific randomness of it, the way fate occasionally decides to stop being subtle and simply shows you the thing you were almost ready to stop looking for. I had a meeting canceled at 2:15 on a Tuesday afternoon. 40 minutes returned to me without warning. I decided to stop by Daniel's office building. Not to spy, I told myself, but to surprise him for coffee. A normal, wifely gesture. The kind of thing I might have done years ago, before ordinary life swallowed the impulse. I believe that, almost. His building was 12 floors of glass and recycled air on the corner of Madison and 43rd. I had been there dozens of times. Christmas parties, the occasional lunch, once to drop off documents he had forgotten in the urgency of a difficult morning. The security desk knew my face. I smiled at the guard, signed the visitor log, and walked toward the elevator bank at the far end of the lobby. The doors of the center elevator were closing. I reached out and pressed the button. The doors opened again. Daniel was inside. Rachel was beside him. Not touching. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters when you are cataloging the moment your life divides into before and after. They were not touching. They were standing with 6 inches of deliberate space between them, the kind of space that two people create specifically to not be seen as close. His hands were in his pockets. Her eyes were on the floor numbers above the door, but her hair was down. Rachel never wore her hair down in the middle of a weekday. She taught yoga in the mornings and kept it tied back, always, practically, without exception. I had never once seen her walk into a professional setting with her hair loose at 2 p.m, and Daniel's collar was turned, the same way it had been turned on that first Tuesday evening when I came home to the smell of jasmine and convinced myself it was nothing. 3 seconds passed. The 3 of us stood inside that small moving box, and the silence was so complete I could hear the mechanical hum of the cables above us. Daniel's face did something I had never seen it do before. Not guilt exactly, not panic, but a kind of rapid internal collapse, like a building losing its structural support, floor by floor. Rachel looked at me. I looked at Rachel. And in that moment, everything that had been constructed, every careful lie, every modulated performance, every she doesn't notice anything, dissolved completely. She noticed. She had noticed everything. I stepped out at the 3rd floor even though I needed the 6th. I walked to the stairwell, sat down on the cold concrete steps, and placed both hands flat on my knees. I didn't cry. I was far past crying. I waited 3 days. Not out of weakness, out of strategy. 3 days to let them believe the elevator was coincidence. 3 days to let their guard settle back into its comfortable position. 3 days to decide exactly what kind of woman I intended to be in the conversation that was coming, because that choice mattered more than anything I might say inside it. I chose a Saturday morning. Daniel was in the kitchen with his coffee and his newspaper and the particular stillness of a man who has convinced himself the danger has passed. I sat down across from him, not beside him, across, with the full width of the table between us, and I placed my phone face up between us with the Notes app open. Mileage records, dates, times. The pattern of Tuesdays and Thursdays mapped across 6 weeks. He looked at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. I want you to tell me the truth, I said. Not a version of it, not the parts you've decided I can handle. All of it. The silence that followed lasted perhaps 40 seconds. I counted. Daniel has a tell when he's deciding how much to confess. He presses his thumbnail into the pad of his index finger, a small private gesture I had noticed years ago and filed away as meaningless. He was doing it now, steadily, rhythmically, like a metronome keeping time on the end of our marriage. Then he told me, "Not everything. I don't believe he's capable of everything, not in a single sitting, but enough. 3 months." It had been 3 months. It had started, he said, as conversation, as comfort. Rachel had come by one afternoon when I was traveling for work, and something had shifted, and he was sorry, and it had never been his intention, and he loved me, and it was over, and— "Stop," I said. He stopped. "Is it over?" Another 40 seconds. The thumbnail. The index finger. "No," he said. I had prepared myself for many answers. Somehow that particular honesty, so uncharacteristic, so precise, was the one that moved through me like cold water. Not the betrayal itself, which I had known for weeks, but the willingness finally to say the true thing out loud. There was almost something respectable in it. Almost. I called Rachel that afternoon, alone, from the bedroom, with the door closed and my back against the wall the way I used to sit as a child when I needed to feel something solid behind me. She answered on the second ring. I didn't give her the performance she was likely expecting. No screaming, no accusations delivered like weapons. I asked her one question only. "Did you think about me at any point, even once, and choose to continue anyway?" The silence on her end was its own answer. "Yes," she finally said, quietly, "the way you say something when you've stopped pretending." "Thank you," I said, and I hung up. I sat on the bedroom floor for a long time after that, not crying. I had moved beyond the geography of tears into something flatter and more permanent. I was taking inventory of the marriage, of the sister, of the years I had spent trusting the two people who had stood closest to me and used that proximity as access. The inventory was almost complete. Almost. There was one more thing I needed to do before I decided what came next. I needed to stop being the woman who waited. I moved out on a Wednesday. Not dramatically. No bags thrown down staircases. No doors left open like wounds. I packed with the same methodical calm I had been cultivating for weeks, filling boxes with the precision of someone who has already done the emotional work and is now simply executing the physical conclusion. I took what was mine. I left what was ours. The distinction was clearer than I expected. 9 years of marriage and it fit into 11 boxes. That number stayed with me as I loaded the last one into my car. 11 boxes for 9 years. Somewhere in the arithmetic of that, there was something worth understanding about what we had actually built together, or failed to build. A life that looked complete from the outside, but had apparently been hollow in places neither of us had examined closely enough, or honestly enough, or in time. Daniel stood in the doorway while I worked. He didn't offer to help. I hadn't asked him to. We had arrived without negotiating it, at a wordless understanding that this particular task belonged entirely to me, that helping would imply a tenderness that no longer had any honest basis between us. He watched with the expression of a man who has finally understood the full weight of what he chose, and is discovering that understanding arrives too late to be useful. "Where will you go?" he asked, when the last box was done. "Somewhere that smells like me," I said. I drove to my colleague Karen's apartment, where a spare room had been offered without conditions or excessive sympathy, just a key and a set of clean towels, and the quiet dignity of a friend who understands that some situations require space more than consolation. I sat on the edge of the narrow guest bed that first night and listened to the unfamiliar sounds of a different building, different pipes, different neighbors, different silences, and felt something I hadn't anticipated. Relief, not happiness, not yet, and perhaps not for some time, but relief has its own specific texture, the loosening of something that has been held too tightly for too long, the first full breath after weeks of shallow ones. I breathed it in deliberately, the way you breathe in air after a long time underground. Rachel called 4 days later. I let it go to voicemail. Listened to the message once, her voice careful and rehearsed, offering explanations I hadn't asked for, and apologies that arrived too precisely worded to feel entirely genuine. She said she needed me to understand. She said the situation was more complicated than it appeared. She said she missed me. I deleted the message without saving it. There are things you save and things you release, and knowing the difference is something grief teaches you if you let it. I was learning, slowly and without grace, which category everything belonged in. The marriage, release, the years of genuine history with my sister, more complicated, filed away somewhere I wasn't ready to open yet. The version of myself who had stood in that elevator and felt the floor disappear, release, immediately without ceremony. That woman had served her purpose. She had seen what needed to be seen. Now there was a different woman sitting on a narrow guest bed in a borrowed room, listening to unfamiliar pipes and breathing carefully, who was just beginning to understand something important. She had not lost everything. She had lost what was already gone. And somewhere in that distinction, quiet, unglamorous, requiring no audience, was the beginning of something that belonged only to her. 6 months later, I still sleep on the left side of the bed. Not because I'm waiting for someone to occupy the right side, but because the left side was always mine, chosen for reasons I no longer remember, held by habit long after the habit stopped making sense. Some things survive the collapse of the structures they were built inside. You carry them forward not out of loyalty, but simply because they've become part of how you occupy space in the world. I think about that sometimes. What we carry, what carries us. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday, which felt appropriate, given everything Tuesdays had come to mean in the architecture of my undoing. I signed the papers at my attorney's office with a steady hand and a clarity that surprised even me. No courtroom drama, no extended negotiation, no war conducted through lawyers over objects that had stopped mattering months ago. Daniel and I divided what remained with the exhausted efficiency of two people who have already taken the most important things and left the rest behind. He kept the apartment. I kept myself. That felt like the better transaction. Therapy came 3 weeks after I moved out. Not because I was falling apart, but because I was determined not to. My therapist, a quiet woman named Dr. Okafor with an unhurried manner and an excellent instinct for the right silence, helped me understand something I had been circling without landing on. I had not failed at my marriage. My marriage had failed to become what both of us needed, and neither of us had been honest enough or brave enough to say so before the damage became irreversible. That realization didn't arrive cleanly. It came in pieces, over weeks, between sessions and after them, in the small hours of ordinary nights when the borrowed room had become my room and the unfamiliar sounds had become familiar. Understanding rarely announces itself. It accumulates, the way water finds its level, slowly, without drama, until one morning you wake up and realize the floor is even beneath you again. Rachel and I have not spoken since that phone call. I don't know if we will. That door sits neither open nor closed. It sits the way unresolved things sit, present and patient, waiting for a moment of readiness that may or may not come. She is my sister in the permanent biological sense that cannot be undone. Whether she is my sister in every other sense that matters is a question I'm not yet prepared to answer. Perhaps that is its own kind of answer. What I know is this. I am not the woman who stood in that hallway smelling jasmine and convinced herself it was nothing. I am not the woman who counted mileage in a parking garage with trembling hands and called it composure. I am not the woman who sat on cold stairwell steps because her legs had stopped working and her understanding of her own life had cracked open like something that was never as solid as it appeared. I am the woman who came after her, quieter, more precise, considerably less willing to look away from things that deserve to be looked at directly. I still make coffee for one now. Measure it carefully, the exact amount, no excess. There is something clarifying about that, about knowing precisely what you need and making only that, no more, no waste. Outside my window this particular Tuesday morning, the city moves with its usual indifference. Traffic, voices, the ordinary percussion of people living their ordinary lives, completely unaware that somewhere above them, a woman is sitting with her coffee on the left side of her bed, breathing evenly, taking up exactly the space she deserves. Not waiting, not watching. Simply here, simply hers. Thanks for watching this entire journey with me. Your support fuels every story we share. Leave a like, subscribe, and brace yourself for the next bombshell.